The community center warehouse held the specific, hollow cold of spaces built for objects rather than people. The air tasted of wet cardboard and November chill, settling heavy in my lungs. I stood in the center of the distribution floor, my breath fogging in the fluorescent hum, trying to impose structure on the logistical wreckage of the holiday food drive. I had built a career on precision, on the ability to organize chaos into profitable strategy. But looking at the mountain of donated cans and mismatched boxes, I felt the familiar itch of losing control. My spreadsheet didn't account for the sheer physical weight of charity. I needed order. I needed a system. What I got was the sound of a heavy boot scuffing the concrete directly behind me. I was attempting to color code the distribution lines, a reflex born of desperation. If I could just align the labels, if I could force the green beans into a perfect phalanx against the tomato soup, the anxiety tightening my chest might finally loosen. I moved with the efficiency that had earned me my reputation, my hands cold but steady, arranging the cans not just by type, but by expiration date. It was a coping mechanism. If the world outside was messy, this shelf, this square foot of aluminum and paper, would be perfect. I was so focused on the geometry of the cans that I didn't notice I was being watched until the silence stretched too long. Then I saw her. She wasn't working. Not yet. She was leaning against a stack of wooden pallets, watching me with a terrifying lack of urgency. She wore a flannel shirt that had seen better decades and work boots that looked heavy enough to anchor a ship. Her posture was insolent, a relaxed slouch that suggested she understood gravity better than I did. She held an apple in one hand, tossing it slightly, catching it with a rhythmic thwack against her palm. She had dark hair pulled back in a messy knot that defied physics, strands escaping to frame a face that was striking not for its beauty, but for its intensity. Her eyes were dark, tracking my movements with a curiosity that felt invasive. It wasn't the deferential look I got from interns. It was the assessment of a mechanic looking at an engine that was running too hot. I adjusted my collar, annoyed by the scrutiny. I expected her to look away. People usually did when I caught them staring. She didn't. She took a bite of the apple, the crunch loud in the sudden lull of the room. "That coat," she said, her voice low and textured, like gravel over silk. "It's optimistic." I paused, a can of peaches hovering midair. "It's wool." "It's white," she corrected, gesturing vaguely at the grime coating every surface of the loading bay. "And you're standing in the splash zone of a very unstable palette of cranberry sauce." I looked down. She was right. A dark, sticky puddle was inching toward my boots. I stepped back, smoothing the front of my coat, hating that she had noticed before I did. "I'm here to work," I said, my voice clipped, "not to discuss fashion logistics." "Clearly," she drawled. She pushed off the pallets, moving with a fluid, chaotic competence that made my rigid posture feel brittle. She didn't walk. She stalked the space. "But you're organizing by color. We need to organize by weight. Unless you want the elderly residents of District 4 to get crushed by a falling box of yams." "You're treating this like a spreadsheet," she observed, stepping closer. The smell of rain and sawdust clung to her. "It's a food drive, not a merger." Her critique was valid, which made it worse. I opened my mouth to argue, to explain the aesthetic value of visual order, but the volunteer coordinator bustled between us. She was a frazzled woman named Linda, who looked like she hadn't slept since October. "You two," Linda pointed a harried finger at us. "You look strong, and," she glanced at my clipboard, "organized. I need a team on the back dock. The late shipment just arrived, and the lift is broken. It's all manual." "I prefer to manage the floor," I began, instinctively reaching for my authority. "And I prefer a margarita," Linda snapped, handing me a pair of rough canvas gloves. "But we're doing this. Go. Back dock, now." I looked at the stranger. She was already pulling on her own gloves, the leather snapping against her wrists. She raised an eyebrow, a silent challenge. "After you, boss," she said, the honorific dripping with amusement. We walked toward the rear of the warehouse. The noise of the main floor faded, replaced by the hum of the industrial heaters. I could feel her presence at my shoulder, a steady, heavy heat. We stepped through the threshold onto the loading dock, the air turning instantly frigid. Behind us, the heavy metal roll-down door rattled in its tracks. The automatic timer triggered, and the metal door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my teeth, sealing us in the semi-darkness. The loading dock was a different world entirely, separated from the organized chaos of the main floor by that slab of corrugated steel. Here, the air was still and sharp, smelling of diesel fumes and the damp, earthy scent of unwashed root vegetables. The only light came from a few caged bulbs high in the rafters, casting long, skeletal shadows that stretched across the concrete. It felt less like a workspace and more like a vault, quiet, expectant, and intimately cold. We faced a wall of crates that had been offloaded in a hurry. They were stacked haphazardly, a towering monument to inefficiency. My instinct was to assess, to plan, to create a workflow. I stepped forward, mentally calculating the volume of the shipment, but she was already moving. She didn't plan. She just did. She grabbed the first crate, heavy with winter squash, and swung it onto the sorting table with a grace that made the 50 pounds look like 5. "You're going to hurt your back," I said, the words slipping out before I could censor them. It was my boardroom voice, the one I used when a junior associate proposed a risky merger. She didn't stop. She didn't even look at me. She just reached for the next crate. "And you're going to freeze standing there, analyzing the structural integrity of a pumpkin," she countered, her voice echoing slightly in the high space. "Grab a box, boss. The truck isn't coming back for these." I bristled, the title stinging more than it should have. I moved to the stack, gripping the rough wood of a crate. It was heavier than I anticipated, the weight dead and awkward in my arms. I lifted it, my muscles protesting the sudden, unfamiliar strain. I carried it to the table, setting it down with a thud that lacked her precision. My breath puffed in the air, a small cloud of exertion. For 20 minutes, we worked in a rhythm that was purely physical. Lift, turn, walk, set. Lift, turn, walk, set. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was filled with the sounds of effort. The scuff of boots, the creak of wood, the heavy exhale of breath. I could feel the heat rising under my coat, a prickly, uncomfortable warmth that made my skin itch. I refused to take it off. That coat was the last barrier between me and the grime of this place, between my identity and the reality of manual labor. She, on the other hand, seemed to draw energy from the work. She had rolled up the sleeves of her flannel shirt, revealing forearms dusted with dirt and defined by the kind of functional muscle you don't get from a Pilates studio. I found myself watching her periphery, tracking the way her body moved. She didn't fight the weight. She leveraged it. She worked with a chaotic efficiency that infuriated my sense of order. "You lift like you're angry at the vegetables," she said suddenly, breaking the rhythm. She paused, leaning a hip against the table, wiping her forehead with the back of a gloved hand. Her eyes were dark, amused, dissecting me. I set down a crate of onions, perhaps a little too hard. "I'm lifting with purpose. We have a deadline." "We have all night," she corrected. She watched me, her gaze dropping to my hands, which were gripping the crate so hard my knuckles were white beneath the canvas gloves. "You're trying to dominate the task. You can't dominate a potato, boss. You just have to move it." "I don't need a lecture on physics," I snapped, reaching for the next box. "I need this cleared." "It's not physics," she said, her voice dropping, losing the teasing edge and finding something rougher, more observant. "It's control. You think if you move fast enough, you won't have to feel how heavy this actually is. You're terrified of the weight." She wasn't talking about the crates. The accusation hung in the cold air, precise and unflinching. I felt a crack in my composure, a hairline fracture in the persona I had worn like armor for a decade. I turned to retort, to cut her down with the kind of sharp verbal dismantle I was famous for, but my distraction cost me. I reached for a crate on the top of the stack. Potatoes, 50 pounds of them. I pulled, but my grip was wrong. The wood was slick with condensation. The crate tipped, sliding fast and heavy toward my chest. I gasped, bracing for the impact, my footing slipping on the damp concrete. But the impact never came. A hand, strong, calloused, and shockingly warm, slammed onto the crate, arresting its fall inches from my ribs. Her other arm shot out, bracing against the stack behind me to stop the avalanche. Suddenly, the vast, cold warehouse vanished. The world narrowed down to the space between us. I was pinned between the heavy wood and the stack, and she was there, invading my space, her body checking the weight that would have crushed me. The air charged instantly, thick with dust and the sudden, overwhelming friction of proximity. She didn't step back. That was the first thing I registered. Not the safety of the crate or the stability of the stack, but the fact that the danger had passed and she remained exactly where she was. Her arm was still braced against the wood above my shoulder, creating a cage of flannel and muscle that effectively pinned me against the pallets. The air between us, previously frigid enough to see our breath, suddenly felt tropical. I could feel the heat radiating from her, a physical weight that pressed against the front of my coat. It wasn't just warmth, it was a disruption of my personal atmosphere. I looked up, expecting to see annoyance or triumph. Instead, I found her studying me with a terrifyingly calm focus. She was close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her dark irises and the smudge of dirt high on her cheekbone. She wasn't looking at the crate she had just saved me from. She was looking at my mouth, then my eyes, tracking the rapid, shallow rhythm of my breathing. "You have a tell," she said comfortably, her voice dropping to a register that vibrated in the small space between us. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a traitorous reaction to the adrenaline and the proximity. "I slipped," I managed, though the words came out breathy, lacking my usual clipped authority. "The floor is wet." "I'm not talking about the slip," she murmured. She finally pulled back, though the distance she created was negligible, just enough to let the cold air rush back in, chilling the sweat that had broken out on my neck. She hoisted the crate effortlessly onto the table, the movement fluid and dismissive of the weight that had nearly crushed me. "I'm talking about the panic. You stopped breathing the moment you lost control." She turned to face me, leaning back against the sorting table, crossing her arms over her chest. The casualness of it was infuriating. "Finally got your hands dirty, boss. How does it feel?" "It feels inefficient," I lied, stripping off my gloves to wipe my palms on my coat, a nervous tic I hoped she wouldn't catalog. "If the facility maintained their equipment, we wouldn't be risking injury for a bag of potatoes." "And if you were just a volunteer," she countered softly, "you would have laughed it off. But you're not just a volunteer, are you?" The shift in the conversation was sudden and sharp. The playful teasing about my coat was gone, replaced by an interrogation that felt far more dangerous. We resumed working, the rhythm slower now, heavier. I picked up a box of canned beans, grateful for the physical distraction, but I could feel her eyes on me, dissecting the lines of my posture, the cut of my clothes, the tension in my jaw. "I don't know what you mean," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the task. "I signed up on the website like everyone else." "Please," she laughed, a short, dry sound that echoed in the rafters. "You walked in here inspecting the structural integrity of the shelving units. You color-coded the intake forms before you even took off your scarf. Women like you don't spend their Friday nights in a freezing warehouse unless something in their perfectly curated life has gone wrong." I froze, a can of soup halfway to the shelf. The accuracy of the strike left me breathless. I wanted to give her the prepared answer, the one I used at cocktail parties about giving back to the community and corporate social responsibility. It was a good answer. It was bulletproof. But looking at her, at the messy hair, the honest dirt on her hands, the unflinching way she held my gaze, the lie died in my throat. "My life is fine," I said. But the defense was weak, a glass wall trying to hold back a flood. "Your life is loud," she corrected. She stepped closer again, abandoning her own stack. She wasn't working anymore. She was hunting. I can hear the noise from here. The emails, the expectations, the constant grinding pressure to be the smartest person in the room. You didn't come here to help, Arlena. You came here because the silence in that apartment was suffocating you. She used my name. I hadn't told her my name. She must have read it off the clipboard, but hearing it in her mouth, stripped of any title or honorific, felt like a touch. The atmosphere in the loading dock thickened, the dust motes seeming to suspend in the air. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, heavy with the things I refused to say and the things she already knew. I turned to face her, intending to tell her to back off, to reestablish the professional boundary she had so effortlessly crossed. But the words failed me. She was standing there, open and observant, waiting for me to stop pretending. For the first time in years, I felt entirely, terrifyingly seen. Above us, the bank of fluorescent lights gave a loud electrical buzz and flickered violently, plunging us into momentary darkness before buzzing back to life. The interruption should have broken the tension. Instead, it only deepened the intimacy, sealing us further into the night. The frenzy of the sort broke as suddenly as a fever. One moment, we were a machine of two, a blur of lifting and stacking that left no room for thought. The next, the conveyor belt of donations ran dry, leaving us in a silence that felt heavier than the crates. The warehouse seemed to expand in the quiet, the darkness pressing in from the corners where the fluorescent tubes couldn't reach. My arms throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, a sensation so foreign to my usual routine of ergonomic chairs and fountain pens that it felt almost virtuous. I sank onto a stack of empty pallets, disregarding the dust that would ruin the wool of my trousers. I was too tired to care about dry cleaning bills. Sloane sat opposite me, perched on a crate of canned yams with her boots resting on the concrete floor, legs sprawled in a posture of absolute ease. She reached into her messenger bag, the leather worn soft and pale at the creases, and pulled out a battered steel thermos. "It's not a latte," she warned, unscrewing the cap. The sound was a sharp shh in the stillness. Steam curled up into the cold air, carrying the scent of something dark and scorched. "It's gas station roast, bottom of the pot. Probably been cooking since the dawn of time." She poured a measure into the cup, which doubled as the lid, and held it out to me. There was no hesitation, no question of hygiene or propriety. It was an offering, or perhaps a test. I took it. The metal was hot against my frozen fingers, a shock of warmth that traveled straight to the bone. I took a sip. It was bitter, acidic, and tasted faintly of burnt hazelnuts and iron. But in that freezing, hollowed-out dock, it was the best thing I had ever tasted. "It's terrible," I said, taking another long swallow before handing it back. "It's fuel," she corrected, taking a sip from the same spot my lips had touched. She didn't wipe the rim. The casual intimacy of the gesture, the sharing of saliva and heat, sent a strange electric jolt through me that had nothing to do with the caffeine. "And it's keeping you upright. You looked like you were about to faint." "I don't faint," I retorted, though the protest lacked heat. "I strategically conserve energy." Sloane laughed, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. "Is that what you call it, up in your glass tower?" She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, the thermos cradled loosely in her hands. The dim light caught the sharp angle of her jaw and the smudge of dirt that still marred her cheekbone, turning her into a study in chiaroscuro. "I bet you have a view that costs more than this entire building. Floor-to-ceiling windows, everything white and chrome, silence so expensive you can hear your own heartbeat." I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly, not from cold, but from the adrenaline crash. She was painting a picture of my sanctuary, but in her voice, it sounded like a mausoleum. "It's minimalist," I defended. "It's clean." "It's empty," she countered softly. Her gaze was heavy, tactile. It felt like she was tracing the lines of my face with her thumb. "You didn't come here to escape the noise, Arlena. You came here because the silence in that apartment was starting to scream at you. You have the perfect job, the perfect clothes, the perfect life, and you are desperate for a mess." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell her about my quarterly projections, my art collection, the dinner parties I hosted, where the conversation was as polished as the silverware. But the lie wouldn't come. Here, in the shadow of 1,000 cans of soup, stripped of my title and my armor, the truth felt unavoidable. "It's not the silence," I whispered, the admission slipping out before I could catch it. "It's the predictability. I know exactly what tomorrow looks like, and the day after, and next year. It's all scripted." Sloane watched me, her dark eyes unreadable but intense. She didn't mock me. She didn't offer platitudes about gratitude or success. She just nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that acknowledged the weight of the confession. "So you came to move boxes in the dark," she murmured, "to see if you could still sweat, to see if anything could still surprise you." "Maybe," I said. I looked up, meeting her gaze. The air between us thickened, charged with a sudden, terrifying awareness. The sounds of the other volunteers, the distant laughter, the clatter of carts had vanished. The hum of the heater cut out, leaving a ringing silence. I looked around the vast, shadowed loading dock. The main door to the distribution floor was closed. The lights in the office booth were dark. "Where is everyone?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly. Sloane capped the thermos slowly, the sound of the threads catching loud in the quiet. She didn't look around. She kept her eyes on me, a small, dangerous smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Gone," she said simply. "Shift ended 20 minutes ago. It's just us." The realization that we were alone didn't bring the fear it should have. In any other context, a parking garage, a subway platform, the solitude would have been a threat. But here, locked inside this cathedral of concrete and cardboard with a woman who looked at me like I was a puzzle she had already solved, the isolation felt like permission. The air in the warehouse shifted, the professional detachment evaporating completely, replaced by something sharper, something with teeth. Sloane didn't move to leave. She didn't check her watch or reach for her coat. Instead, she stood up, kicking the empty crate she'd been sitting on aside. It skittered across the floor with a hollow scrape. She walked over to the largest remaining unsorted pallet, a chaotic mountain of canned vegetables and boxed pasta that looked like it had been packed by a hurricane. "I'm bored," she announced, her voice echoing in the vast, empty space. She turned to me, a grin playing on her lips that was equal parts invitation and warning. "And you're still too clean. Let's make this interesting." I stood up, brushing the dust from my trousers, though the gesture was futile. "I don't play games, Sloane. I execute tasks." "Liar," she said softly. She walked to the center of the sorting tables, dividing the pile with a sweep of her arm. "You love games. You just only play the ones you know you can win. So let's see." She pointed to the left half of the pile, then the right. "Race you to the bottom. Winner gets to ask one question, and the loser has to answer. No spin, no PR strategy, just the truth." My competitive streak is a flaw. I usually dress up as ambition, a sharp, hungry thing that has propelled me to the top of my field. I felt it flare now, hot and immediate in my chest. I looked at the pile. It was massive, messy, and physically demanding. I looked at Sloane, who was already rolling her shoulders, loosening up like a boxer stepping into the ring. "Fine," I said, stepping up to the table. "Prepare to be psychoanalyzed." "Go," she whispered. The first 5 minutes were a blur of motion. I attacked the pile with a ferocity that surprised me. I wasn't just sorting cans. I was dismantling the chaos. Corn to the left, peas to the right, pasta in the bin. My hands moved with a speed that defied the cold, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Beside me, Sloane was a machine, her movements fluid and rhythmic, but she wasn't silent. "You're overthinking the expiration dates," she taunted, her voice low, sliding under my defenses. "You're checking the year. Just look at the dust. If it's dusty, it's old. Trust your instincts, Arlena." "My instincts are precise," I gritted out, slamming a crate of tomato sauce onto the conveyor. "Your instincts are repressed," she countered, tossing a box of macaroni with a perfect arc into the bin. "Look at you. You're trying to maintain posture while lifting 20 pounds of beans. Let it go." She was goading me, using her voice like a physical touch, distracting me with the low, textured rasp of her commentary. I could feel her eyes on me every time I reached for a box, tracking the way my shirt pulled across my shoulders, the way my breath hitched when I hit a heavy layer. It was predatory, this attention. She wasn't just racing me. She was hunting for the breaking point, and she found it. Around minute 10, the heat became unbearable. I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. But the wool coat was suffocating. Without breaking my rhythm, I tore the buttons open, shrugging the heavy coat off and letting it fall to the dirty concrete floor. I didn't care. I rolled up the sleeves of my silk blouse, not neatly, but shoving them up to my elbows, exposing skin to the cold, abrasive air. A strand of hair fell into my eyes, plastered there by sweat. I didn't fix it. "There she is," Sloane murmured, close to my ear. She had moved into my space to grab a wayward can, her breath ghosting against my neck. I knew there was a human under there somewhere. The proximity spiked my adrenaline. I grabbed the last heavy box on my side, a dense pack of canned peaches, and hoisted it. My muscles burned, a delicious, searing fire that obliterated the mental noise of my life. I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't a strategist. I was just a body, moving weight, breathing hard, alive in a way I hadn't been in a decade. I slammed the final box onto the finished stack a split second before Sloane dropped her last can. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet warehouse. "Done," I gasped, bracing my hands on the table, my chest heaving. My hair was a disaster, my expensive blouse was ruined, and my hands were filthy. Sloane stopped. She looked at her own pile, one can remaining, and then at me. She wasn't disappointed. She was smiling, a slow, dangerous expression that made my victory feel unstable. She leaned back against the table, crossing her ankles, looking at me not as a conqueror, but as something she had successfully unraveled. "Congratulations, boss," she said, her voice dropping to a hush that felt louder than a shout. "You win." I stood there, panting, the endorphins crashing into the sudden stillness. I had won the game. I had proven my competence. But as I looked at her, at the way she watched the rise and fall of my chest with undisguised fascination, I realized the trap. I hadn't defeated her. I had just stripped away my own defenses to do it. I had won the race, but in the process, I had given her exactly what she wanted. Me, undone. The victory, sharp and bright as it was, burned out quickly, leaving behind a heavy, leaden exhaustion that settled deep in my marrow. The adrenaline that had carried me through the race evaporated, and in its wake, the physical reality of the night crashed down. My muscles, unaccustomed to this specific, brutal repetition, began to hum with a dull ache. My hands, usually steady instruments of corporate will, felt foreign, swollen, raw, and trembling with a fine, uncontrollable tremor. I leaned against the sorting table for a moment, trying to steady my breathing, trying to reclaim the composure I had so recklessly discarded. But the warehouse air felt thinner now, stripping me bare. I turned to the final task, securing the heavy, rolling security cage that separated the loading dock from the main storage. It was a formality, a simple mechanical act to close the night. But as I gripped the iron latch, it refused to move. The mechanism was old, the metal pitted with rust and grime, stubborn in a way that felt personal. I shoved against it, putting my weight into the lever, but it held fast. I tried again, frustration rising like bile. I was the woman who negotiated multi-million-dollar acquisitions before breakfast. I would not be defeated by a piece of rusted hardware. I gritted my teeth, pushing until my boots slipped on the concrete and my shoulder dug into the wire mesh. It wouldn't budge. My arms shook violently, the fatigue making a mockery of my effort. I didn't hear her move. I felt her. Sloane didn't ask if I needed help. She didn't offer a polite inquiry or a condescending joke. She simply stepped into the space behind me, collapsing the distance until the air between us vanished. She didn't push me aside to take over. She stepped in to reinforce. I froze as I felt the radiant heat of her body along the length of my spine, a wall of solidity against my trembling form. She was close, dangerously, impossibly close. Her chest brushed my back, a ghost of a touch that felt heavier than the crates we had been lifting. She reached around me, her arms caging mine, her hands settling over my white-knuckled grip on the lever. Her skin was rough, warm, and steady. My hands were small and shaking beneath hers. Hers were large, capable, and terrifyingly still. She didn't pull the lever. She just held my hands, grounding the tremors with her own weight. "You're forcing it," she whispered. Her voice was right at my ear, low and textured, vibrating through my shoulder blades. "You're trying to break it because you're angry it won't obey you." "It's stuck," I managed to say, though my voice was barely a breath. I should have pulled away. I should have elbowed her back and demanded space. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the sudden, overwhelming sensation of being held up. "It's not stuck," she murmured, her thumbs brushing over my knuckles, a slow, deliberate caress that sent a shockwave through my nervous system. "It's just heavy. And you're tired. Look at your hands, Arlena." I looked. Beneath the dirt and the red marks of exertion, my hands were vibrating like a tuning fork. And wrapping them, steadying them, were hers. "You're shaking," she said. Not with pity, but with a clinical, intimate observation. "You've spent your whole life convincing everyone you can carry the world, haven't you? And now you're falling apart over a gate latch because you don't know how to let it be heavy. The truth of it hit me harder than the physical exhaustion. It wasn't just about the volunteer work. It was the realization that my independence, the thing I prized above all else, the thing I wore like a crown, wasn't a trophy. It was a fortress. I had built walls so high and so thick that no one could get in. And now, trapped inside, I was starving for exactly this: the simple, terrifying grace of someone else's strength. I had equated needing help with failure, but standing there, encased in her warmth, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt, for the first time in years, like I could let go. "Breathe," Sloane commanded softly. "Stop fighting the metal. Just move with it." She applied pressure, not sharp, jerky force, but a slow, leveraged weight. She guided my hands, using my own grip, but lending her strength to the motion. We moved as one entity, a synchronized shift of gravity and intent. The latch groaned, a sound of metal yielding to patience rather than force. Then, with a loud, echoing clack, it slid open. The echo of the latch opening died against the concrete walls, but the vibration of it lingered in my hands. Or perhaps that was just the ghost of her touch. Sloane didn't step back immediately. For a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, she remained right there, her chest inches from my back, her heat a solid, undeniable presence in the freezing air. The warehouse felt suddenly vast and microscopic all at once, the entire universe narrowing down to the friction of our proximity. When she finally pulled away, the loss of her warmth was a physical shock, sharper than the cold draft from the bay doors. I turned slowly. I should have been relieved. I should have thanked her, grabbed my coat, and retreated to the safety of my car and my curated life. But my feet felt leaden, rooted to the spot by a gravity I couldn't name. I leaned back against the wire mesh of the security cage, the metal biting into my shoulder blades, and looked at her. Sloane stood in the half-light, watching me. The playful, predatory edge was gone from her expression, replaced by a stillness that was far more unnerving. She wasn't looking at the CEO. She wasn't looking at the volunteer. She was looking at the wreckage underneath. "You can go now," she said softly. It wasn't a dismissal. It was an opening, a test. "I can't," I whispered. The truth of it clawed its way up my throat, raw and unbidden. "If I leave now, I have to go back to the silence." "The silence is expensive," she noted, her voice low, stepping closer until the toes of our boots were almost touching. "Isn't that what you wanted? The view, the peace, the distance from all this mess?" "It's not peace," I said, and my voice cracked, a fracture in the porcelain. "It's anesthesia. I fill every minute of every day with strategy, with acquisition, with noise. Because if I actually stop for 1 second, I'm terrified I'll realize that none of it matters. I came here tonight because I needed to feel something heavy. I needed to feel something that I couldn't delegate." The admission hung in the air between us, naked and terrifying. I had never said it out loud. I had barely admitted it to myself in the darkest hours of the morning. But here, with dirt on my face and my hands trembling from exhaustion, the armor was gone. I was wide open. Sloane didn't flinch. She didn't offer pity, which would have destroyed me. Instead, she offered recognition. She reached out, not to touch me, but to rest her hand on the wire mesh beside my head, effectively boxing me in again. Her eyes searched mine, dark and unflinching, stripping away the last layers of my pretense. "You think you're running a company," she murmured, the words brushing against my skin like a physical caress. "But you're just building a fortress. You think if the walls are high enough and the schedule is tight enough, you won't have to deal with the fact that you're lonely. You're not addicted to control, Arlena. You're addicted to safety, and you are starving to death inside it." Her words were a scalpel, cutting straight to the bone. It was a violation, this level of seeing, but it was also the most intimate thing anyone had ever done to me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. The air between us thickened, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. I watched her lips move, mesmerized by the precision of her assessment, by the way she seemed to know the geography of my fear better than I did. "You're right," I breathed. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The pull was undeniable. "I'm starving." The silence that followed was heavy, a living thing. We stood in the wreckage of the night, the dust motes dancing in the dim light, suspended in a moment of absolute, terrifying clarity. There was no kiss. The distance was negligible. The invitation was there, in the rapid rise and fall of her chest, in the darkening of her eyes. But the verbal intimacy was overwhelming. She had reached into the center of my life and turned the lights on. "Then stop eating the menu," she whispered, her voice rough with an emotion I couldn't place. "And start eating the food." I opened my mouth to answer, to ask her how, to ask her to never stop looking at me like that. But the heavy metal groan of the exterior bay door shattering the moment. The morning crew. The heavy metal door rolled up, and the morning didn't greet us. It invaded. Gray, watery light spilled across the concrete floor, washing out the shadows where we had hidden for hours. The sudden influx of cold, fresh air swept away the thick, charged atmosphere we had cultivated in the dark, replacing the scent of dust and proximity with the smell of exhaust and damp pavement. The illusion of our private world shattered under the weight of the incoming day. I flinched, physically recoiling from the light. It felt like an exposure. The sound of a truck backing up outside, the beep, beep, beep piercing the quiet, signaled the return of the timeline, the schedule, the world where I was a CEO and she was, well, a stranger. The reality of who I was supposed to be rushed back into my lungs, suffocating the raw, trembling version of myself that had just admitted to starving. I scrambled to reclaim the armor. I reached for my coat from where it lay in a heap on the floor, the wool cold and stiff against my heated skin. I pulled it on, my fingers fumbling with the buttons, executing a desperate, tactile retreat. I smoothed my hair, though I knew it was hopeless. I checked my watch, a reflex that felt hollow. I was rebuilding the fortress, brick by brick, button by button, trying to bury the vulnerability back under layers of cashmere and competence. Sloane didn't move. She didn't straighten her flannel or check a phone. She simply stood there, bathed in the harsh, unforgiving gray light, watching my frantic reconstruction with a look of profound, devastating disappointment. She wasn't judging the mess. She was mourning the cleanup. "You're fast," she observed, her voice flat, stripped of the earlier playfulness. I blinked, and the CEO is back. Suit on, visor down, shields up. I froze, my hand hovering over the final button at my throat. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I was just cold, that I had a meeting at 9. But the lie felt too heavy to lift. "I have to go back," I said, my voice sounding thin and brittle in the open air. The world doesn't stop just because I had a moment. Is that what this was? Sloane pushed off the sorting table, walking toward me. She stopped just outside my personal space, close enough that I could see the fatigue in her eyes, mirroring my own. A moment? A glitch in the system? It was a shift, I corrected, the word tasting like ash. "But I can't live in a warehouse, Sloane." "No," she agreed softly. "But you can't live in a mausoleum either. Not anymore. You've seen the cracks, Arlena. You can patch them over with work and wine and expensive silence, but you'll know they're there. You'll feel the draft." She held out her hand. For a second, I thought she was going to touch me, to bridge the distance one last time, and my skin pricked with a phantom anticipation. But she was just holding out her phone. The screen was bright, waiting. "Put your number in," she said. It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. I hesitated. Giving my number to a stranger, a volunteer with dirt under her fingernails and a terrifying ability to read my mind, was against every protocol I lived by. It was messy. It was unpredictable. It was a direct line to the chaos I had spent a decade avoiding. I took the phone. My fingers were still trembling slightly, a residual vibration from the night's exertion. I typed the digits, watching them appear on the screen like a code to a bomb I was voluntarily setting. "If you text me," I warned, handing it back, trying to regain some semblance of control, "I might not answer. My schedule is—" "Your schedule is a shield," she interrupted, slipping the phone into her back pocket without looking at it. She held my gaze, her expression unflinching and dangerously knowing. I'm not going to text you to ask about the weather, Arlena. I'm going to text you when I know you're sitting in that glass tower, staring at a spreadsheet and realizing you can't breathe. I'm going to text you when the silence gets too loud. The promise hung between us, heavy and absolute. She wasn't offering a date. She was offering a lifeline. And we both knew I was drowning. Go, she said, nodding toward the open bay door. Before you start trying to organize the dust motes again. I turned and walked toward the light. My legs felt heavy, my body aching with a specific, delicious soreness that I knew would remind me of this night with every step I took. I stepped over the threshold, out of the shadows of the warehouse and into the biting morning air. The city was waking up, horns honking, engines revving, the relentless machinery of urban life grinding into gear. It should have felt familiar. It should have felt like home. Instead, as I walked toward my car, the polished, predictable world looked different. The buildings didn't look like monuments to success anymore. They looked like cages. The silence in my head wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. I wrapped my coat tighter, but the cold wasn't on the outside. The reckoning hadn't stayed in the warehouse. It was walking with me, matching my stride, demanding to be heard. I had survived the night, but as I unlocked my car, I realized with a jolt of terrifying clarity that the real danger was just beginning. I wasn't going back to my life. I was returning to the scene of a crime I had just committed against my own numbness. And I had left the only witness standing in the dark, holding my number like a weapon. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor took exactly 45 seconds, a seamless, silent ascent that usually gave me time to compose my thoughts. Today, it felt like a decompression chamber, sealing me back into a vacuum. When the doors slid open, my apartment greeted me with its aggressive perfection. The air was filtered, scrubbed of humidity and life, smelling faintly of expensive linen and nothingness. I walked into the foyer, my heavy work boots leaving a trail of warehouse dust on the polished marble, a criminal act in a space designed for socks and silence. I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by furniture that was more sculpture than seating. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city I had supposedly conquered, a sprawling grid of amber lights and moving traffic. Usually, this view made me feel powerful, a queen looking down at her chessboard. Tonight, it just looked like a terrarium. I was the specimen, trapped behind 2 inches of reinforced glass, watching the real world happen without me. I stripped off the ruined clothes, leaving the silk blouse and the wool trousers in a heap on the floor, disrupting the minimalist aesthetic of the bedroom. I didn't care. In the shower, the water pressure was calibrated to a therapeutic pulse, but it felt weak compared to the biting cold of the loading dock. I scrubbed the dirt from my skin, watching the gray water swirl down the drain, and felt a sudden, sharp pang of loss. I was washing away the evidence. I was scrubbing off the only thing that had felt real in months. The steam rose around me, scented with lavender and isolation, suffocating in its politeness. Wrapped in a robe that cost more than the pallets I'd been sitting on, I walked to the kitchen. My body hummed with the ghost of the night's labor. My muscles ached, a deep, satisfying throb in my shoulders and back that reminded me I had a physical form, that I wasn't just a brain floating in a boardroom. I touched the spot on my back where Sloane's chest had pressed against me, the memory of her heat still phantom bright on my skin, a brand I couldn't wash off. I made coffee. My machine was a chrome monolith that ground beans with a hushed whisper. I watched the dark liquid stream into a porcelain cup, the crema perfect, the temperature exact. I took a sip. It was smooth, rich, and utterly soulless. It tasted like nothing. I set the cup down with a clatter that echoed too loudly in the open concept space. Sloane was right. The silence had teeth. It wasn't peaceful. It was expensive. It was the sound of a life curated to exclude all friction, all mess, all risk. My phone buzzed on the kitchen island, a single, short vibration that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. My heart did a traitorous flip, a physical reaction that had no place in my disciplined physiology. I stared at the screen like it was a live grenade. The number had no name, just a string of digits I had typed in with trembling fingers an hour ago. "You're staring at the view," the message read. "And you hate it." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, a laugh bubbling up that sounded jagged and rusty. She was doing it. She was dismantling the defenses from 5 miles away. She wasn't asking how I was. She wasn't being polite. She was reaching through the digital void and putting her finger right on the bruise. She knew exactly where I was standing and exactly how empty it felt. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. To reply was to admit she was right. To reply was to open the door I had spent a decade locking. It was messy. It was unpredictable. It was exactly what I needed. "The coffee is too smooth," I typed back, my fingers moving before my logic could stop them. "It tastes like glass." The response came 3 seconds later. "Then come back down. I know a place that serves mud, and they don't care about your quarterly projections." I looked at the perfect apartment, the perfect view, the perfect, empty life. Then I looked at the phone. The choice wasn't between safety and danger. It was between suffocating and breathing. "Send the address," I typed. I hit send. The swoosh of the message delivering sounded like a lock clicking open. I wasn't just replying to a text. I was resigning from the cult of my own control. The volunteer program hadn't just sorted cans. It had sorted me. I looked at the city below, no longer a kingdom to rule, but a playground to get dirty in. The reckoning was over, and the unraveling had just begun. If you've ever found clarity in the chaos of a stranger's company, subscribe for more stories.